edition of the Rochford Files. Sorry for the late start, but that's just how it goes in the streaming world. And my guest today is Michigan-based and Colorado-placed. Still no camera, but here's Kevin Kerby.
Hey.
So how was your trip back home?
It was pretty good. I mean, airports are still more strict on the mask than most places. Which, I mean, at this point, I'm like, it seems normal to be in a crowded space and wear a mask, but that's just to me, at least. Airports, like being in a plane bus is kind of gross anyways.
Yes. I've noticed that since people have been definitely not letting things slip up when it comes to social distancing.
Yeah.
Pretty much since the updated CDC guidelines, there's been a lot more COVID fatigue responses now.
Yeah.
The Rochford Files is live on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook Live. So before we get into I'm going to take a moment to spread the word. So is there anything else you'd like to say about your trip real quick?
Nothing really. It was nice. See some family in Michigan. Didn't end up fishing for once. I usually fish down there.
Nice. So is that area considered a small town or
it's like right near St. Clair, which is like it bleeds into Huron. So it's like an hour south of Detroit. I don't know if any of that helps, but it's Lansing.
Oh, yes, I'm familiar with Lansing.
Yeah, that's why Chauncey Billups was my favorite. He was Colorado born and Detroit champion, so it kind of felt right. All right, we can get into this if you're ready.
Oh, yeah, I just got. Let's get that up on this.
Sure.
Screen.
So he's not going to run for Senate now, just governor?
Yes, this just came out this morning. Just need to get everything positioned this just right. There we go. Let's read. I'm going to read the important parts of this article real quick.
Right.
There's no road trip, no soul searching, no beard or blogging, but Beto O'Rourke is making a political life decision again. 3 years after becoming Democrats' breakout star out of Texas and a year removed from crashing back to earth in a short-lived presidential run, O'Rourke is again weighing another campaign, this time for governor. But now O'Rourke, who has teased an announcement of his bid for the White House on the cover of Vanity Fair, is being quiet about it. He says he hasn't ruled out anything, but isn't saying much else, and Texas Democrats are itching for an answer. Patience is not the word for it, Texas Democratic Party Chairman Gilberto Hinojosa said, but anxious is. For months, O'Rourke has kept his options open. A top aide to the former Texas congressman and presidential candidate said O'Rourke, 48, has not ruled out challenging Republican Governor Greg Abbott in 2022, but has taken no formal steps towards a campaign, like calling out donors or recruiting staff. The aide spoke on condition of anonymity in order to discuss private deliberations more freely. So, Kevin, what's your reaction to we're considering another run for office in Texas again?
I mean, I guess it's expected, but I kind of forgot he existed for a while, to be honest. I don't know. I mean, Democrats continuing to use the same old strategies that have lost for the last 50 years. It sounds great.
Yes, as I've said early on into my show, the one except I would make a rare exception for the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
And when it comes to governor or mayor, when the gap of difference in candidates is right. But when it comes to Beto O'Rourke, I'm not sure he's enough of the gap, especially when you consider how the district is set up in Texas.
Yeah. Well, it's like they're still stuck on the new wave. I mean, third wave politics, and I don't know. You're never going to win a lot with third wave politics.
And the other big issue is one of the major platforms of his campaign is gun control.
Yeah,
and
that's not going to work in Texas.
And as long as he continues to make that a central point of his campaign,
yeah,
he's not going to have a chance there in Texas, especially when even people on the left are down on the idea of gun control, just because we know that it disproportionately negatively affects people of color when you try to push that.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, he's just not the right guy to challenge Greg Abbott. It's just another example of the American moderate trying to challenge a far-right Republican, and we've seen it rarely ever works out, especially once you get less and less national.
Yeah. I mean, you also need someone charismatic, and it doesn't seem to me that he has much charisma if you want to win without having any policy.
I feel like his charisma is very fake and forced.
It doesn't seem like it sells to Texans more than it sells to a fake national audience. I don't know. I don't think they buy his BS.
Yeah, he doesn't even seem like that interesting of a person, especially from that Running Beto documentary. I don't think it sold him. It helped his case at all.
Yeah. That's just what I find funny, because it's like I guess it's possible to win in a different way that I wouldn't even support, but Democrats aren't even good at doing that. There's just a lot of incompetence that goes on.
Does he have any type of real political future?
I mean, I think it might be like Dick Cheney route, where he doesn't really end up sitting in any office, but maybe just in a presidential seat if it's a Democrat in office. That's my gut feeling. I guess he could win a governor seat, but I don't think he'll ever be a senator at this point. His best chance, he lost.
I think his only shot is to be a mayor, so he's got to go to a major city like
Maybe
Houston, Austin,
That
Dallas.
could happen, but I don't see much more than that unless he goes like cabinet seat kind of thing, which I don't know. Put him in as an oil guy because he is sold off to those people. That seems realistic to happen in 10 years. I don't know if that made any sense, but it's just my thought.
Yes, he wasn't exactly a priority guy for the Biden administration.
No.
I mean, if Kamala takes over in 2024, I mean, he could have a better chance of getting in her administration.
That could happen, but I don't see him winning any like Senate seat or anything. I don't think that's really his future in politics.
Same here. Let's move to a story from over the weekend. It's from the Toronto Star. I don't have access to the article, but
Sure.
the reason why I'm sharing light to this is because there's a portion of the left that gets too focused in the class prism, the class reductionist left, and
Yep.
they forget that we need to still prioritize racial issues as well. And when you look at a country like Canada, who has a bit of the social democrat policies in place,
More at least.
It's proof that racism is still an issue there. And
yeah.
And in this thread, at least put quotes from many of the people who contributed to the article. So let's go through these real quick.
Sure.
First one is from Jay Williams, an educator. We can't let the momentum fall off. Yes, we're fighting the worldwide pandemic of COVID-19 and all its variants, but we've also been fighting the worldwide pandemic of anti-Black racism and anti-oppression for more than 400 years. This isn't a fad or fly-by-night concern. Did you have any response to that first quote?
I mean, I definitely agree. It's even if you're thinking selfishly and not being empathetic, which I'd hope most people would be empathetic to anyone for good cause, but unless we free everyone, no one is truly free, right? That's like why things like NAFTA are very harmful to both sides, except for the most powerful. It's if we only think about the workers, the white workers in one country, and you forget about everywhere else, they'll just abuse the workers that don't have rights elsewhere, or the people that don't have rights.
Yes, and I think this quote was very telling of the response that that the United States had over this last summer with George Floyd, which is nearly a year since it happened now, and how many of us knew that it's been the bigger problem in this country than a pandemic, which should eventually be waning down soon. It may not happen this year, though. Then you had the detractors who downplayed COVID, but then suddenly decided to selectively use it to exist when it came to coming against those protests.
Yeah.
And let's get to this next quote.
Sure.
Despite forward progression, performative allyship is at an all-time high, as it is easy to add a hashtag or black square to your Instagram page. But I don't always see follow-through or action being taken to advance the core tenets of the movement from Allison Gibson, entrepreneur and social enterprise consultant. And I felt like that was one of the strongest quotes that got posted in this thread.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that exposed a lot of people who were involved in these protests over the summer. They were in it as a means to get Donald Trump out of office.
Yeah.
But we know that these are going to start up again at some point under this Biden administration, and there's going to be less people around. And I felt like there was a couple interesting moments, like for example, when I saw a video of some random stores being looted, and there was this white woman who was telling the people to stop because this helps Trump, and that woman was telling on herself because there was, and that was one of the things I knew would be a issue with the movement, and also how it's been co-opted a lot as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think a good strategy for average people to have, I'd hope the next time these protests come up again, is talk to your coworkers and genuinely talk about going on strike. That's some real solidarity. That actually, I think that is more effective in some cases in combination of being on the streets.
Yeah, I know. I've talked about the general strike early on and how we just don't have the raw numbers to support that in the same way that we at least showed during last year for these Black Lives Matter protests. But
there isn't the infrastructure there was in the 60s. But not to say it can't be built.
At the same time, I feel like for now we could at least make some small progress happen by continuing to boycott applying for like fast food and retailers until they up their wages.
Yeah, don't cross those picket lines.
And it doesn't take a lot of people for that to happen.
Nope.
They're eventually going to have to artificially increase wages in order to get people back to work.
It's true.
Next quote here. Folks are more willing to have honest conversations about race and far more willing to criticize police violence. It's a long cry from 2016 when we demanded to remove police from Pride and were met with heavy backlash. So, Kevin, how have you seen the progress shift on this?
Well, can you read that one more time? I'm sorry.
Folks are more willing to have honest conversations about race and far more willing to criticize police violence. It's a long cry from 2016 when we demanded to remove police from Pride and were met with heavy backlash. Sandy Hudson, co-founder of Black Lives Matter Canada.
I think people are starting to see what the average Black person in America faces to a small extent. They're starting to see more of the truth than what they're just shown on TV every day. So they're becoming awakened, as it is, to the injustice, because they can talk about it, but I think there was especially after Obama, so there's a lot of people that pretended America was post-racial, and they're like, oh, we had a black president, that means we aren't racist anymore. And I think I'm not hearing nearly as much of that crap anymore.
Yes, so at the start of last decade, I felt like the discourse was too focused on police reform and how every police reform that's been suggested, it's not going to work because
they're reforming
just about
themselves.
yeah,
Sorry.
and pretty much every reform allows them an out to not follow the reform.
I mean, they're pretty much enforcing the rules on themselves, so I don't know what's to be expected.
And
Sorry, I
how
interrupted you.
oh no, you're good. And how yeah, there's still too many liberals who fall for the grift of the police needing more money to improve themselves when we've seen, I think it's more obvious now than ever that that's just not going to work.
I mean, I don't think people realize like America's police budget is almost as much as China's military budget.
And don't forget the defense and spending budget is about is bigger than the next
Last
like
23 countries.
6 or 7 next highest countries combined.
Yes. So yeah, we got the top 3 on there. Military 1, then China, and then American Police Department 3.
Then over the summer, I felt like we've made a lot of progress on getting people behind the defund the police movement, even in despite of all the the counter defunding the police movement, and also all the people who got hung up on the slogan.
I mean, I always find that weird because there was a time in this country where people were hung up on the slogan of abolition. So I tend to say I'm not going to compromise on these things.
Then their big argument from that was also defund the police slogan was too unclear. But my argument is to flip that back on its head and say that your police reform is too ambiguous and it's not clear what that means either.
Yeah.
And that one of the problems we have with the political discourse is a lot of people we've become lazy, and we should want to dive deep into policies that get proposed and go well beyond the surface level. And we should demand that our politicians go deep into explaining what they want when they propose specific policies.
Yep.
So let's go to this next quote. Nothing has changed in my life. The same conditions that existed before continued unabated. Since May 2020, no substantive discussions on how we get the leaders we get, on how our priorities and goals are set, and how and what the institution should mean in the world have been actually had. Ronaldo Walcott, Associate Professor at University of Toronto. So what's your takeaway from this quote?
I mean, he's pretty much, at least what I'm getting, he's pretty much saying things haven't really changed at all. I mean, I guess except for like average person's perspective, but in terms of actual progress, in terms of actual change, of oppression being lifted, nothing has changed.
I think you've got a good summation of that, but I wanted to expand on that by saying that I think another thing that we saw happen is we didn't have enough leaders out there making real concrete demands. It was easier for the ruling class to ignore us when only the activists are making the demands.
Yeah.
And it was some missed opportunities for our progressives to speak at these events and advance the agendas, and instead of just doing it through Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you look at another, one of the things that they asked from it was like end qualified immunity, and our state of Colorado was the only one to do it during the height of the protests. Two other states have recently followed through on it. I believe it was New Mexico and Connecticut. So there's so little that came from that.
Yeah, and that just makes me think because it was the Elijah McCain protesters here. So the people who organized those peaceful protests are facing up to 50 years in prison right now. The police and the people higher up are targeting the organizers. We've got to keep a watch on that. We want
to. Yes, and once there's any further developments, Andrew Rochford here on the Rochford Files will be sure to cover that, because I haven't done a lot of local politics coverage yet on the show, and I've been tailoring more of it local to my guests so far. But I will get better about it as I try to connect more with more of the Colorado comrades we have here today, like Kevin.
It just made me think of that. They're changing a lot of the laws in like probably more southern states, more Republican controlled states, where the little protest rights you have are even being more taken away. So police can just come in without any provocation and just break up the protests and arrest everyone.
Yes, that's happened in 34 states, just for everyone to understand how much they're trying to fight against movements like Black Lives Matter. And this next quote: "The murder of George Floyd sparked a tipping point for so many and pushed the general public to get involved in the fight and protection of Black lives. I am no longer having to prove that anti-Black racism exists." Raven Wings, Black Lives Matter Toronto Steering Committee. Your thoughts on that quote?
I think that's where you have seen the progress, because of the people actually going on the streets and people seeing the actual violence with their eyes, instead of just, because I think when you just hear about it, it can be distant, and you're like, well, that's just an exception to the rule. I mean, you can make yourself believe the lies. I guess it's a little easier than when it's shoved in your face, the reality of what's happening.
Yes, and I think there's a lot of people that got to experience the police violence back at them through tear gas, the rubber bullets.
Or even like how the police were targeting news reporters. Sorry, I couldn't think of it. How they were targeting them and medical people.
Yes.
I mean, they learned that from the IDF. That is a tactic.
And also, don't forget, some of these people will even get ran over by police as well.
Yep, that too. So there's a lot of horrible things that happened.
And I think another thing is, sometimes you hear from white people that helped validate it, like Jane Elliott. This next quote: "For the first time in a long time, while the The people in positions of power, better known as our leaders who don't look like us, are starting to realize and acknowledge that there is a problem that needs to be addressed and fixed. Ebenezer Otang, aka MC Ebone, Master of Ceremonies. So, Kevin, what do you think of how our leaders in the United States have responded?
I mean, I guess I'll put it a little more cynically, but it's just, I think the reality is they're realizing at this point that if they do nothing and they completely take the side of the police, that's no longer politically feasible. And I mean, unless, not saying every time, but I'm saying for many of these politicians, they're realizing they have to at least have the appearance of appealing to the protesters. And even if they're not doing things, making it seem like they're doing something. So there's some progress there instead of just completely ignoring it.
Well, that progress didn't exactly help do anything hurt Joe Biden.
No, I mean, I think part of that was most people would have beat Trump because of how horrible his COVID response was. And then the economy crashing. I think just about anyone could have won that election.
And the sad part is, with as close as the margins were in a few states,
yeah,
that when the liberals talked about how even a ham sandwich could beat Donald Trump,
yeah,
the ham sandwich probably
do better.
Wins that election by a greater margin than Joe Biden
doesn't have the
Kamala
baggage.
Harris did.
No,
but back to this quote.
Yeah.
I think the other big issue that we only got symbolic promises to come from these protests.
I think it's frustrating, but I think that's a sign that they know they can't completely ignore it. They at least have to BS more. Because from what my memory, it was they used to just not even bring it up at all. So now they're realizing, oh well, I have to BS. So the next step, I guess, would be no, you actually have to take action.
Yeah, so you brought up a good point there, as some organizations who could have ignored it in the past, like Major League Baseball or the National Hockey League, they actually felt like they made a bit more progress compared to the NFL.
Oh yeah,
at least in a bigger increment.
I know the MLB, they're recognizing the Negro League stats. That has become official. It took them that long and all that pressure, but I guess that's more than some politicians have done.
And without the protests taking place over the summer, MLB doesn't move the All-Star game from Atlanta over what Governor Brian Kemp has trying to do with the voting rights over there.
Yep.
And choosing a state like Colorado, which is at least one of the best in terms of voting rights and access that we got right now.
True.
Next quote: if white people can learn and understand neuroscience and quantum physics and solve global pandemics, they can learn and dismantle anti-black racism if they're really intentional about changing it. So, Eva Simone, trans advocate, community organizer, performer.
Mm-hmm.
So, how's the progress with white people on this issue?
I don't know. I'm in a very like insular group. I mean, I'll meet other people, but when you're meeting random people, you don't really have these conversations. Usually, this stuff doesn't come up. So I'm not so sure. I mean, within my friend groups, I talk about that, but I know to some extent I desire people that think similar to me. So it's hard for me to say. I still hear
Yes,
this from like some of my more racist family that when they're challenged about it, they think, well, there's like a black person talks about their experience and they consider it like, oh, so you're like threatening me, and they get very defensive instead of just having a conversation with a person. It's very odd.
so I feel conflicted on it because I feel like during the course of the protest, you at least had a small amount of white people who have the right rhetoric to respond to the protest, police violence, and rioting. But since then, I feel down because of the people who have gone silent when it comes to Joe Biden hardly being any different than Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And
oh, sorry.
And it also goes to show that the white people there who are not really interested in trying to address race issues exist in all political ideologies.
That's true. I think there's been progress, but how much, I don't know. I don't talk to a. It's hard to say.
And when you listen to black leftists like the Fred Hampton left, you'll realize that we still got a bit of a struggle within the left, for example, on how to prioritize race versus class issues and the strategy of what we do to achieve both.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the last quote. In a harrowing year for all, many black law students and lawyers are no doubt feeling burned out, down, and depressed. The trend de jour for large organizations is to claim to be fighting anti-black racism in Canada with largely symbolic, well-meaning initiatives, such as signing a pledge. So this is from Ish Aduranmu, law student at Lincoln Alexander School of Law. Mm-hmm. We touched the symbolic, well-meaning gestures a bit. Did you have anything more to elaborate on that?
Well, this is just a tangent. It made me think of this. It's like under our capitalist system, there's not a lot of monetary benefit to you to do the right thing, to go into a expensive law school student debt and prosecute for the people, protecting average people. So it's kind of hard to build these things up within the system. So I think we probably should. Those are things we should keep in mind, because it's not to be defeatist, but rather implement new strategies and, I don't know, build larger monetary even organizations to help fund these things.
Yeah, it's the first person I thought of reading this quote was Brianna Joy Gray, because she used to be in law, and one of the things that stood out from her was saying how one of the biggest protests in history, but how it hardly achieved anything. And this quote also led us into how the Canadian politicians pretty much did similar things to try to placate the movement.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not obviously as familiar with Canadian politics, but I think far too often that because they're compared to America, they're like, oh well, see, we're not racist. Look at America down there, where they still have very deep roots in institutionalized racism as well.
Yes, on that point, there aren't a lot of Canadian leftists in this movement, but one I do recommend following is Andre Domise. He's had some of the best takes on Israel and Palestine over the past couple of weeks, as I mentioned on my show last week.
Mm-hmm.
But one, I don't think the other well-known Canadian leftist is David Dole, but I don't think he's a great person to follow, just because he's more the sock dem type.
I think the only ones I'm familiar with are like the Serfs. If you,
Yeah, Lance.
I like them. Lance. I forget he's Canadian, but he is.
Yeah, so he's better than okay on most of those issues.
Mm-hmm.
I just think he gets too focused in reacting to the low-hanging fruit of right-wingers.
True.
So, let's get to this next story that connects to this. Sasha Johnson, Black equal rights activist in critical condition after being shot in the head in South London. Black equal rights activist is in a critical condition in hospital after being shot in the head in London yesterday. Police are appealing for information after Sasha Johnson, 27, was found with life-threatening injuries in Southwark at about 3 a.m. Sunday morning. In a statement on its Facebook page, the Taking the Initiative Party, a new political group she was part of, said, "It is with great sadness that we inform you that our own Sasha Johnson has sustained a gunshot wound to her head. Sasha has always been actively fighting for Black people and the injustices that surround the Black community, as well as being both a member of BLM and a member of Taking the Initiative Party's executive committee. Sasha is also a mother of 3 and a strong, powerful voice for our people and our community. Let's all come together and pray for Sasha, pray for recovery, and show support to her family and her loved ones. Mrs. Johnson has successfully undergone surgery, but she remains in hospital with her parents by her side, a friend told BBC News. Imarn Aiton said Mrs. Johnson is believed to have been at a party at the time of the incident, and that a rival gang might have heard about someone being in that party that they didn't feel quite comfortable with or trusted, so they resorted to driving past and shooting into the garden. And one of those shots obviously hit Sasha Johnson, they said, but she was likely not the intended victim. Detectives from the Met Special Crime Command, Trident, are pursuing a number of priorities lines of inquiry, but no arrests have been made yet. While the investigation is at an early stage, there is nothing to suggest that the woman who was shot was the subject of a targeted attack or that she had received any credible threats against her prior to this incident. So I'm about to go to the restroom real quick, Kevin,
Yeah.
but I'd like to hear your thoughts on the story.
So I hadn't heard of her before, but sounds like she was involved with BLM in Britain, in England. Oh, it's pretty tragic. So it sounds like a drive-by gang shooting accidentally killed her. I mean, not accidentally. Sasha Johnson. So it looks like I'm not. She's still in recovery on life support. I, hmm.
So I heard what you said right there. So it's unfortunate that there's a weird way of how these incidents happen to leaders of the movement, like of movements for Black liberation like this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely a tragic thing that happened right here. And I'm still skeptical of it being an incident that Sasha Johnson was caught up in.
Yeah, we'll probably never know because the police are going to do the investigation unless someone does like a different outside source, maybe. But at this point, I'm not sure. So I was trying to look into this, trying to find out a little more.
Yes, I don't think we'll be able to expand beyond this, but I'm glad that Sasha Johnson was able to form her own movement in
Mhm.
the UK. And I hope she's able to make the recovery and continue to push forward for Black Lives Matter in London.
Mm-hmm.
So this next story happened over the weekend, and it comes from AOC, who's often been gaslighting the left this year. So I'm gonna read it. AOC reveals she's in therapy following attempted coup at Capitol. Speaking to the weekly public show Latino USA on Friday, Mrs. Ocasio-Cortez said members of Congress effectively served in war during the traumatizing event that had deeply affected lawmaking and impacted the legislative process. After the 6th, I took some time, and it was really with Ayanna Pressley that when I explained to her what happened to me, like the day of, because I ran into her office and she was like, "You need to recognize trauma," Mrs. Ocasio-Cortez said, and I felt like I learned the hard way after my father passed away when I was a teenager. That happened at a young age, and I locked it away. You have to live with it for years. Asked if she was in therapy, she replied, "Oh yeah, I'm doing therapy, but also I've just slowed down. I think the Trump administration had a lot of us, especially Latino communities, in a very reactive mode." In the near aftermath of the pro-Trump riot, Mrs. Ocasio-Cortez released an Instagram live video saying she hid in the bathroom fearing for her life as police knocked on her door with huge violent bangs. It became another flashpoint in the culture war as right-wing media said she exaggerated her level of danger and left-wing media attempted to debunk the criticisms as downplaying the severity of the attack. Mrs. Ocasio-Cortez told Latino USA host Maria Hinojosa those criticisms were an attempt to maintain white supremacy and that no one wants to discuss the politically sensitive fallout or say boo-hoo, but that she recognized it as a traumatizing event. I've had to take a beat. If I had to take a couple of months and just be really good, then I don't have to live with this thing festering and lingering with me like a roommate in my apartment for years, she said. Mrs. Ocasio-Cortez said terrorist insurrectionists got in the Senate chamber 60 seconds after Vice President Mike Pence left and that lawmakers weren't protected. Pence was the one person, arguably, that had most important roles in making sure that procedurally the Electoral College went on as proceeded. 60 seconds could have potentially meant the difference between what we have right now in a martial state. Mrs. Ocasio-Cortez said this was an all-out attempted coup. If 60 seconds went differently, if a different door was opened, if a chair wasn't barricaded in a certain way, we could have a completely different reality right now. We don't want to acknowledge that, so then that's how close we got. But this is how close we got. She said they were looking for us, and we were not protected, adding that Republican criticisms of her were attempts to maintain the myth of American exceptionalism and white supremacy. White supremacy in and of itself is a mythology, and you have to protect it in order to protect that political power, which has become a very important base of the Republican Party. Kevin, what's your response to these quotes that AOC had in this article?
I mean, I don't really have a problem with it because, like, I think honestly, it's pretty underplayed how serious what happened on the 6th was. If you disagree, that's fine. But the thing that I find more concerning that is not talked about is how it's been confirmed that there was generals higher up that were involved in this, and they made sure the National Guard couldn't come in, and there's other things that we should be pretty worried about. That if there's someone ever to actually challenge power, they are not afraid to coup, to just get rid of the person who the people decided they wanted and put in a dictator. I think the military-industrial complex is not above that. That is something that's important to bring out of this. And there's things where they took out the security button, to have guards come in Ilhan Omar's office and some other people's. There was some planning that went on. It was maybe not the most organized, but this is probably not a great sign of rising fascism.
So overall, I'm still skeptical about what happened on January 6th because I saw incompetence on both sides. The people who stormed the Capitol weren't organized with their plan, and they were just there to run around and mess around like frat boys. Then what's frustrating is the Capitol Police decided to just handle it with kid gloves and let these people run amok. Then you've also got all the varying levels of experiences from the politicians who were there.
Mm-hmm.
Like Cori Bush was never really in fear. Nancy Pelosi said she was prepared to defend herself. And the fact that AOC's location wasn't as close to where the actual action was when this happened. So, how do you feel about the varying responses that you got from people who were there on that day?
Well, it's like they said it was the most serious thing ever, and they don't arrest Trump, which they should have. They have every power; they can still do it. Biden is president; they have the legal authority to put him under trial, and yet they refuse because I don't know. I guess that's against the code. No matter what you do.
I think the problem is the response from this.
Mm-hmm.
We got a performative impeachment for one.
It was a
Then
joke. The impeachment shouldn't have happened. It should have just been a trial, an actual trial.
then you had they used the wrong amendment to impeach him on.
Yeah.
Then the fact that with the frustrations that the left has about the squad,
Yeah.
they get to be the ones front and center pushing the impeachment.
I mean, it doesn't make sense to impeach someone who's already out of office which I think he did. Trump tried to commit a coup, even though it was completely incompetent. He should be legally tried, but I don't know. I guess that's outside of political reality right now to hold fascists accountable. And whether you I can understand having problems with them, and it's pretty serious to not.
Yeah, the reason why I'm not big on this is because of as I said, the incompetence that both main sides displayed on it. And we know if left movement tried to go to the Capitol and make some real demands,
people would have been murdered.
Capitol Police wouldn't have let them anywhere close to the Capitol on that day.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And the fact that this is being prioritized and used as a distraction to prevent people on focusing on real issues that affect us right now.
Yeah.
So let's go back to that bill last week where the squad was split on the increased funding for the Capitol Police.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe AOC was secretly really for it, but tried to use the present vote as cover?
I don't know. It seemed like a milquetoast middle ground of I'm not going to be for it, but I don't want to be held responsible for it passing, but I don't want to be held responsible for it being upheld. So whatever she believes, it was I'm not going to take a politically courageous action here. I'm just going to make it. I don't know. It just was weird. It was odd. I get what you're saying. I'm not sure, but it might as well have been a vote yes for it in all practical
Among
sense.
the three people who are in the present, along with Jamal Bowman and Rashida Tlaib, I
Mm-hmm.
felt like just based on the inconsistent rhetoric is she was secretly for it, but she didn't want that full yes vote. And the fact that if Bowman and Tlaib just held their ground, she could have still kept the present vote
Mm-hmm.
and it still wouldn't have passed. And they think that having three people vote present instead of two was just enough to calm people down and throw them off this calculated strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, do you feel like AOC's trauma is valid?
Oh, of course. I mean, what happened, I could understand it being traumatic. I will never challenge anyone's. It's just not in my. It would even someone who I disdain, Mike Pence. He could have trauma in the situation.
So, do
If
you
they
think
got
it's
to Mike
possible?
Pence, he probably was in more danger than even AOC.
Yeah.
They
So, do
he
you
was
think it's
genuinely a
possible?
target from the. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, sorry. But do you think it's possible for the trauma to be valid and for that same trauma to be weaponized in the wrong way as well?
Sure. I won't question that she has trauma. I can see what you're saying, though.
And yeah, I think the only issue I have here is I feel like AOC is weaponizing the trauma in the wrong way. And I think she's trying to use it as a shield from criticism of a lot of what she's done since the Biden administration has gone in.
Mm-hmm. She's been a lot less antagonistic than she was under Trump. I mean, because she's of like the old school thought of you build coalitions, you make compromises, and that. And I guess I have different opinions on that, but that seems to be her strategy.
I feel like she's done a lot more punching left
Yeah.
since then. And I think that she's been exposed to a degree as someone that the Justice Democrats poorly vetted before trying to get her to run.
Yeah. There's been some good things. I mean, compared to like the average politician, is she good? But it's a low bar. It's a pretty
And
low bar.
now she's, for all intents and purposes, more like a liberal and gets wrongly anointed as the leader of the squad who doesn't vote or organize like a squad.
Yeah, I mean, Bernie and AOC definitely are more of your like what liberal used to mean. Like they're probably, if there was actual pressure, kind of in the camp of your FDR, your Lyndon B. Johnson, but there isn't that social pressure and the union pressure and the people's pressure right now, so they don't do it. And I say that because if you look at the history, like before FDR was in power, he was a moderate. It was only because of the extreme pressure put on by the people that he compromised with them. So I guess I just view all politicians to some extent with cynicism.
Yeah, you brought up a good point about that, and you brought me to something I'd like to push back against, especially the social Dems who continue to bring up Bernie Sanders' presidency. So let's go off into a tangent real quick and say what would be different about Bernie Sanders' presidency right now, because I think that you would still have to pressure him a lot
Mm-hmm.
on the campaign promises. So, what do you think some differences would be right now compared to what Joe Biden has done?
I think when presidents, when if I'm looking at it, I don't think any foreign policy would be different. Just historically looking, I don't think it matters who's president. I don't think the police state, those things would be very different. But I think what you would see is I don't know, some push for like actual student loan forgiveness. I think that would happen more likely. Um, an actual maybe a jobs program during COVID. I know it's a crazy idea. Those have never worked before. Um, like actually more spending on the people. Good things. It's not like revolutionary things, but things being a little more positive, I guess.
So, for me, I think the first couple things is from that first stimulus plan.
Yeah.
I think Bernie Sanders would have definitely made sure that that check was $2,000. I'm not sure he would have been able to leverage another check beyond that.
I think
Then I think
$15 might have gone through. Oh, sorry.
also I think that UI would have remained at $400,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he would have been able to push it a bit longer than early September. Then when you go into executive orders, I think that we would still be trying to pressure him to do more.
Mm-hmm.
I think he would have ended up compromising on the student loan debt forgiveness.
Maybe there would actually be any instead of zero, which is what it looks like. Oh, God. Sorry.
At least a substantial amount.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure we would have been able to get him to commit to all of it like in his campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Then I still not sure he would have followed through on the executive order of Medicare for all either.
Yeah.
I think he may have become wishy-washy on that, and especially with the makeup of Senate, if it didn't change much.
If it fell the exact same, well, we'll just put it the way.
Yes.
So you're
And
not
we know
relying
that
on people like Manchin and Christine
cinema.
I think. Yeah.
And when you look at the police funding, he would have tried to take a more moderate approach to it because he's always been against the idea of defund the police.
Mm-hmm.
I think he would have deflected from that a bit by trying to just focus on a couple of the parts of the platform, like decriminalizing drugs and whatnot.
Yep. I do think maybe a little different, but I don't think there would be much substantial difference between Joe Biden and Bernie's position on Palestine and Israel once he would be a president.
Yes, we're about to get into a Bernie Sanders quote soon, but I think he would have been willing to make a slight cut in funding, or at least
or do what Obama did, where he criticized,
or more of a
I don't know if you
conditional.
remember that. If you remember what Obama did during the Gaza, it was like in 2014 when they were taking more land again. So Obama, criticized him in front of Congress, but then they expanded their funding of Israel. So I wouldn't be even shocked if it was something like that.
So this next story,
he might criticize it around the edges, but in terms of policy, I don't know. I haven't been convinced any of them would be very different on that issue. Sorry, I
Yeah. No, you're good. But now let's get into something from Dua Lipa over the weekend.
Mhm.
So this ad got placed in the New York Times on Saturday, and it falsely
Jesus.
claimed that she was part of Hamas, and a couple of other celebrities as well were included in the photo. So the ad says, Hamas calls for a second Holocaust. Condemn them now. The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. Then the Jews will hide behind rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees will cry out, "Oh, Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill them."
So this was in the New York Times?
Yes, on Saturday.
Mhm.
Then let's get into Dua Lipa's response. I utterly reject the false and appalling allegations were published today in the New York Times advertisement taken out by the World Values Network. This is the price you pay for defending Palestinian human rights against the Israeli government, whose actions in Palestine, both Human Rights Watch and the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem accuse of persecution and discrimination. I take this stance because I believe that everyone, Jews, Muslims, and Christians, have the right to live in peace as equal citizens of a state they choose. The World Values Network are shamelessly using my name to advance their ugly campaign with falsehoods and blatant misrepresentations of who I am and what I stand for. I stand in solidarity with all oppressed people and reject all forms of racism. Kevin, what did you think of the statement from this the rising British pop star Dua Lipa?
So in that ad that they had in the New York Times, was it he was one of the people accused of being in Hamas, or is that, am I getting that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I want to make sure I have the context right. I mean, I understand. I think it's more of a defensive statement because of him being compared to like committing a Holocaust. So I understand where he's coming from. I think that's at least my reading of it. And then talking about human rights, I get where he's coming from being accused of that bullshit. I'm not super familiar with this situation besides what you just showed me. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm not either. But with celebrities, not very many celebrities have been willing to make a pretty strong even statements.
I've only seen
strong
really Mark
as
Ruffalo or something. Sorry,
even statements just as strong as Dua Lipa did here. Especially since I said she's a rising star in music, and it would have been very easy for her to just stay silent or make the safe pro-Israel statement.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand why she would make a favorable Palestine statement, because she's also she grew up in a Muslim family.
Mm-hmm.
Although it's sick how the New York Times allowed that advertisement to go through.
Mm-hmm.
Since they're one of the, due to how propagandized their publication is.
Yep.
And how would someone not check that ad? Because that should reflect very poorly on you when you let an inaccurate ad go through, regardless of how much they pay to get that on.
Well, even on that end, even if you're not thinking, besides it being abhorrent, it does this. They could easily be sued on this, and I wouldn't even be surprised if they get sued.
Yes, I do hope that Dua Lipa does decide to sue,
Mm-hmm.
and the other two women that were placed in there as well.
That's why this statement read as like maybe a lawsuit's coming. I'm not saying that's a guarantee, but that's my read on it from the little I know. Which I understand. I probably would sue them too if that happened to me. No, what I'd be curious, this is slightly off topic, if you go back to like when in the 70s, in like more like the late 80s, when Americans started learning more about South Africa apartheid, and back then New York Times lied and they claimed they didn't tell the truth about the South Africa situation, how different it is compared to how they report about Israel and Palestine.
Yeah,
Those situations are similar.
yes, we've had a lot of connections to that, especially as the Israel has decided to ramp up their attacks on Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
So let's shift over to this Bernie Sanders quote. I forgot to connect my audio, so I'll just read the tweet. Some progressive lawmakers, including AOC, used the term apartheid to describe Israel's treatment of Palestinians. Bernie Sanders, former Jewish outreach director, says the charged language can fuel anti-Semitic incidents. I think we should tone down the rhetoric, Sanders says. What do you think of the tone policing hypocrisy that people like Sanders have recently done?
It's depressing because he used to not on that issue. He used to have a different opinion, but since he ran for president, that he backed off that. In the 80s, when he was new to politics, he called out Israel for what they were doing and called for two-state solution. And I think he was the only senator to do that. So it seems like he's given up on that stance. And that's
honest.
Sorry.
Go finish.
And it is a very in Democrats that they're very, very defensive, as is the Republicans. Is they attack anyone that criticizes Israel, and even Bernie criticizes them to a mild degree, very milquetoast criticisms, and he's called out for it. So the discourse is not there right now.
Yeah, I feel like Bernie Sanders has flip-flopped a lot on this issue, especially during his campaigns, because he knew if he wasn't careful on this issue, he probably would have
get Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, or lost a bit of support that he needed to try to earn the nomination.
Yeah, he's like the only Western politician that I think has like a stance that I am okay with. Most of them are pretty wishy-washy. Sorry.
And then also the fact that, as I was saying about the hypocrisy, because he knows better to do that when it comes to policing. He's generally not going to push rhetoric that tone polices the black people especially. But at the same time, he's helped validate what a lot of the pro-Israel people say about overblowing the anti-Semitism out of proportion.
I mean, it is an apartheid state. That's not a mischaracteristic. It's very accurate.
Yeah, that's definitely not a lie.
It's closer to how America was an apartheid state when Western expansion was happening and we were stealing native land than South Africa. But South Africa is a more modern example. South Africa is just slightly different. Sorry.
I think that sums it up well on Bernie Sanders performing tone policing in a situation where there are Jewish people here that who are very good on this issue and aren't going to tone police us. And
I know.
the main person
Oh, sorry.
and the main person I will cite for that would be Katie Halper.
I forget which group. It's a Jewish rights group in America. Sorry that I can't remember the name of them, but they've changed their official stance in the last year to they say Zionism is racism. And I don't know if they go as far to say as calling an apartheid state, but that's showing that people's minds are they're becoming more aware of what's going on.
So we're about to get to our last story today on the Rochford files. So, Kevin, did you decide to get vaccinated?
I did.
And which shots did you choose?
I just took what was available. I think I got Pfizer.
Yes, as I've revealed recently, I just got my second Pfizer shot last Tuesday. And I was fortunate so far from both shots only to feel a bit tired. But I wanted to go to Jimmy Dore sharing his experience with the second Moderna shot because about a week and a half ago on the show, I called out some progressives for performing erasure of criticisms of the vaccines, especially erasing left criticisms like Jimmy Dore's. So I'm going to read his tweets real quick. Update: got my second Moderna shot on April 17th. Have had body and joint pain and general flu-like symptoms ever since. Most recently, experiencing wicked stiff neck on same shot side the shot was administered. This is over a month now. And when you click through these quote tweets, there's going to be a lot of the progressives that are the vax absolutionists, going through trying to invalidate these symptoms. But Jimmy Dore is proving that there could be some real side effects that go beyond just being sick for a day or two. What are your thoughts of the discourse that's happened from Jimmy Dore revealing his symptoms?
I mean, what I find, I think that's interesting. Sorry, I forgot what I was saying for a second. No, I think sometimes what's also missed is from like white leftists is it's not talked about the history of some of the shit that's gone on with like medical experiments that have happened to blacks and natives of this country without their consent, and why there's
Tuskegee experiment.
That as well. And some of this is still going on, or like what happens in the ICE facilities where they do non-consenting tube ties. There, and or how there's a genuine threat for people who are Hispanic or illegal, that if they get the vaccine, that's when they get thrown to ICE. So that stuff I feel like can be tone deaf because that isn't brought up. They just brought up that like their uneducated masses. I feel like that's kind of I don't know, racist to me. But I don't, even if you disagree with like saying that, bringing up, I mean, I think you should still get the vaccine even if it has side effects because we're saving lives. But being an asshole about it, how is that going to do anything? Like, are you actually going to convince people, or are you just going to prove that you're kind of I don't know, a jackass?
Yeah, you pretty much called out the majority of the group that of the progressives that are just coming out with shitty bad faith attacks, calling
Mm-hmm.
it an experiment of anti-vax or Jimmy Dore's ascension to the right because there's people who feel like he's been that way for a while just because he doesn't stick to the approved progressive talking points. And Nick pretty much nailed it in this top reply here. Jimmy Dore derangement syndrome has people attacking him for simply sharing his personal health experiences. Insanity.
Yeah. I mean, you know what you could would be far more effective is us pushing Joe Biden to get rid of the patents on the vaccine because we need the vaccine to be global, that all the vaccines to be global if we want to actually deal with the pandemic instead of getting upset at some random person on Twitter.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well because Joe Biden just barely got shamed into lifting those patents a couple weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's
And
like
you
the
also,
bare minimum. We should probably be doing more than that, but
yeah. And you also have to understand the reason why there's a lot of people skeptical of taking this vaccine is because a lot of it is very experimental
mm-hmm.
and there isn't the testing that's needed for it. So that's another issue as well. And there's a lot of people of color on the left
Yeah.
who don't trust any of these vaccines right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason why they don't plan to take them. And that doesn't mean they're anti vax either.
No, I mean, it's interesting because these like liberal leftists, in terms like traditional sense, because they're for social democratic policies, but they don't want to actually socialize the country. If I'm making sense, uh,
Yeah.
oftentimes they also they just repeat the propaganda the state says about Russia and China's vaccine, where I'm not saying you can't criticize those countries, but the Sputnik vaccine has been the safest one to take and just as effective as everyone else. But there was a lot of propaganda thrown around about how, oh, it's so dangerous and people are dying, and it's had it's had similar it's had enough. It's like what, 5 million people have used it, so that's a good sample size, and it's had uh very few effects, no deaths or anything. So I don't know, it's interesting how that's not brought up, where we fall into our nationalism a little too much.
And a lot of these people who are attacking Jimmy Dore for telling his experience, they're just hitting him with the big pharma talking points.
Yeah.
And we have to be more critical, think more critically about what big pharma tells us.
Mm-hmm.
And to go further into Jimmy's reasoning for taking the vaccine, he said it was recommended to him by that doctor that managed to save his life. So when he did it, it was because he trusted his doctor, because I'm also seeing the people on the left who weren't getting the vaccine also criticize him for making that decision as well.
Mm-hmm. Also, their strategy isn't. It's kind of like shaming people into voting. It tends to not be very effective when you like aren't empathetic to someone where they're coming from, even if you disagree. Because it's not about what it seems to me is like it's not about them wanting people to get vaccinated. It's about them wanting to be like, huh, I'm right and you're wrong, and you're just a dumb hick. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, he's getting attacks from both sides. And I know Jimmy Dore is considered divisive,
I mean, I have my
and
problems with him, but this isn't one of them.
and he's and a lot of his attacks are brought on him, especially for being one of the top voices for force the vote, and how a portion of the left really turned against him.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why this discourse in this in his replies and the quote tweets are pretty rough to look at.
Yeah.
So as I said before, with the information about all these vaccines right now,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's fair to take the authoritative stance and try to force people into taking the vaccines. And at the same time, I feel like you're going to have a slight majority take these vaccines anyway.
Yeah.
And if the information was really trustworthy, it would speak for itself, and you would get even more of these people who are skeptical right now to change their position and get the shots. And with that being said, the reason why I chose Pfizer over Moderna or Johnson and Johnson,
Mm-hmm.
and even AstraZeneca, which is being offered in Canada, is because just based on my observation, the Pfizer symptoms were less severe than any of the other shots being offered.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you had that type of thought process as well.
I mean, with my job, I'm interacting with a lot of people. So first I thought I just need to get it because getting COVID is more dangerous than the vaccine. Not to say you can't criticize the vaccine there, but in terms of just risk evaluation, any vaccine I'm going to be better off with than possibly getting COVID. That was my logic. And then I'm like, whatever one I can get the fastest.
Yeah, for me, my logic was always I'm choosing the one which I know from feeling that I'm decreasing my odds of getting those aggressive symptoms that
Mm-hmm.
are worse than average, that I hear a lot more from people who take Moderna instead of Pfizer
I also
or even
thought
Johnson and
they
Johnson.
might end up taking the mask mandate down before I thought they should have, which I think my gut feeling about that was correct. So I'm glad I got it as soon as I could, just for my own
Yeah,
self.
yeah,
If
I
you don't
think that
work, because
was
I work in a service industry job, if you don't, I could understand having a different perspective. But that was my risk evaluation to it.
Yeah, I don't have the high risks just yet
Mm-hmm.
because I'm still looking for another job.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like made the best decision I could with the information that's currently available.
For sure.
And with that being said, Kevin, did you have anything to plug before we end the show?
Nothing personally. Just remember, I guess my plug is if you see those signs up that are saying, "Oh, we're out of work. No one wanted to come in." If you can, don't work there. Don't work there right now. Don't cross picket lines.
Yes, I agree, Kevin. Continue
All
to
right.
hold out at those places until they meet that $15 minimum wage floor.
Mm-hmm.
Then, when we are ready for the general strike, we could push them even further.
That's the real reason that the Republicans and Democrats like Joe Manchin, and to some extent all of them, but especially Republicans, are against the welfare state because it gives workers more power. It gives them a safety net. So when they say no, enough's enough, that they're not starving, and it takes a little power away from the employer, and that's what they don't like about it.
And don't forget to follow Kevin Kerby on Twitter at Kevin Nerby, KEVEANERBY. He's a
Maybe
lock account.
I'll get my regular account back one day. I lost. I got suspended. uh, I just posted Pat Tillman was murdered, and I got my account axed.
So even with that being said, Kevin should
Well,
have way more followers on Twitter than he currently has right now. And it was good having you on as a
all right,
guest
thank you.
again. And I look forward to bringing you on the show soon.
All right, thanks for the talk. That was nice.
Oh, and have a good rest of your week, Kevin.
I will. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. All right, that was Kevin Kerby, everyone. He's a good comrade on the left. Goes back and forth between Michigan and Colorado. And that'll be all for today's edition of the Rochford Files. Don't forget to go to patreon.com/the Rochford Files. Hopefully, I'll eventually get some patrons rolling in soon. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on YouTube, youtube.com/the Rochford Files. Please give me some follows on Twitch, twitch.tv/the Rochford Files as well. And follow me on Twitter at NugLifeComrade. That's NUGGLIF Comrade. And I'll see y'all on Wednesday for another edition of the Rochford Files. And hopefully by then, the Nuggets will have a 1-1 tie in their first round series against the Blazers. But until then, I'll see y'all on Wednesday.